Hi, this is Les Miller. Welcome to another video. What we're going to talk about today, a topic I have been trying to get covered for an entire year now. My first attempt at this back in the spring, 10 months ago. In a park in Calgary, was going to go up to Nose Hill again to finish the extra up there. Didn't work out, kept on putting it on the back burner and trying again now here. No matter what, I'm sorry to say this is going to be a hog. This is going to be a huge long video because it's a deep, complicated topic that I just cannot cover in a short time. Matthew 24, a multi-level prophecy is what we'll be talking about. Now I'll give you a quick, simple answer as an overview fast if you aren't able to take 35 to 45 minutes to go through this right now. But what do I mean by multi-level prophecy? Cross-referencing the different chapters where Jesus gave end-time events prophecies. People thought back then they were in the time. People thought over the centuries they were in the time of the end. And we think today we are in the time of the end of the world. Second coming of Christ is close, hopefully, is what a lot of believers feel. Now, skeptics, of course, think this is foolishness. I found a great video by Mr. Beat. He's very nice, but I think it comes off from a bit of a skeptical attitude, but I recommend you watch it. That is a brief history of the end of the world. He covers how in so many generations people did think they were the ones. I made an attempt to give him a response, and it's on my Mr. Les channel. If you carefully look at that big list in Wikipedia that you talked about, Mr. Beat, you'll see a common pattern. Most of those predictions, whoever made them, was predicting the end would come just a little bit beyond their own lifetime. Basically, they could only imagine the world from their point of view. They were predicting the end of their world. They were taking their fear of death, their concern for death, or their hope for heaven, and projecting it onto the world that they knew. Basically, Jesus worded the prophecies this way because he wanted us to believe in our time we were going to be the ones to see the end, because this is the time in which we need to make our decision to accept him as our Savior. So in reality, every generation is correct. The prophecies came true over and over again in a round by round fulfillment. There's a fulfillment we can understand on the local level that culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. We will cover that. And then there's a gradually unfolding understanding through world history. We will cover that. And then we'll go again with a round of fulfillment for the end of time. I am not going to read all 4 chapters of the Bible and go through every single thing. You've got signs that were about things happening outside the church, things like wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, and then you've got discussions about things happening inside the church. We're going to look at all over, and again, I just ask you to give me patience because I need time to explain this. I'll go with the footage that I recorded the other day, and I thank you for your willingness to share this with me. All right. So what I'm going to do first, I've got the computer on for a few minutes here. I'll turn it off afterwards, making some noise, but I want to go to BibleGateway.com. That is my go-to site for Bible studies. So I'm going to go Matthew 24, get the whole chapter. Mark 13, Luke 17, and finally Luke 21. The end of the world, like I said, the destruction of Jerusalem. So think about the wars, rumors of wars, and famines that probably happened between the year, Jesus probably gave this in 31 AD, and between that and the year 70. We've got Acts 11:28. Then one of them, named Agabus, stood up and showed by the Spirit that there was going to be a great famine throughout all the world, which also happened in the days of Claudius Caesar. Here we have an example. A famine that fulfilled Matthew 24 happened in the days of Claudius Caesar. Certainly there were more famines during the Dark Ages, weren't they? Each and every single one of them, a fulfillment of Matthew 24. Same with any wars that the Roman Empire had to face during that time. Same with any wars that will happen at the very end. Now, the contrast between the abomination of desolation, which we'll cover in a minute, and the local events of them in their times is shown in Luke 21:20. Abomination of desolation is actually something for the gradual unfolding of church history. It's not the local event. So that's why we get a difference here in Luke 21. Luke 21:20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. People today who don't understand prophecy correctly are looking for literal Jerusalem in our time to be surrounded by armies. That's not going to happen. That's all a myth. When Jesus left the earth, he took the holiness with him. And that land hasn't been holy since 34 AD, since the Jews rejected Christ completely at the stoning of Stephen. But the cross-reference to the Matthew 24:15 reference of the abomination of desolation that applied to them in their generation is actually explained by Ezekiel chapter 45, verses 3 and 4. So this is the district you shall measure, 25,000 cubits long and 10,000 wide. In it shall be the sanctuary, the most holy place. It shall be a holy section of the land, belonging to the priests, the ministers of the sanctuary, who come near to minister to the Lord. It shall be a place for their houses and a holy place for the sanctuary. This reference in Ezekiel 45 was for the people rebuilding Jerusalem after they came back from their captivity in Babylon. So the prophecy was, the instructions rather, to the prophet were that the land immediately surrounding the city of Jerusalem was to be called a holy place. In 66 AD, I believe is what Josephus said, the first attempt was made by the Romans to conquer Jerusalem. And the armies surrounded the city and placed their soldiers on this land. So the Christians in Jerusalem who saw this, and for some reason, miraculously, the army was called back, gave them just enough time to escape. They escaped to Petra, and not one Christian died in the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 as the war went on. When Jesus was answering the Pharisees' questions in Luke 17, versus the other 3 chapters we're looking at, he gives up some of these summaries. And then he says in chapter 17, verse 25, but first he must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. A warning to the Pharisees. The cross was going to happen. He knew about it. A prophecy to his believers to comfort them. Again, they couldn't handle it. Every time he tried to tell them what was going to happen, they clung to their misunderstanding of prophecy that they had at the time, mixing up second coming and first coming prophecies. So he did warn them. But here we have another way to understand the local reference. There was a fulfillment of all these events in the time of Christ. But I want you to think about what it must have been like for the Jews and the Christians living in 71, 72, 73 AD, up to the time when John received the book of Revelation. That was, I think, around 96 AD. They must have thought that since the temple was destroyed, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed, that the second coming of Christ was going to happen immediately as well. And Christ appeared to John, gave him more prophecies. help them to understand there was going to be more to come. Going back to our Matthew 24 reference on the abomination of desolation. That's verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Right there in the reference, a fact that is mentioned that this is very, very deep. And it takes a lot of study to really understand it. It's not something you can just gloss over. And what's happening with the misinterpretation now is people are glossing over it. They're forgetting when Jesus went up to heaven, not only he took the holy place with him, but the conflict between good and evil was taken to the next level as the church replaced Israel as God's chosen people. And the church followed Western civilization as it spread out to the world. All the things with the Dark Ages, that's the conflict, that's the tribulation. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But the Daniel 12 reference. Daniel 12, 11, and 12. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. 3.5 years, the Bible mentions. 1,260 days, the Bible mentions. 42 months, the Bible mentions. I could do a separate video just on that. That is the history of the Dark Ages. The popes were given political power by the Emperor Justinian. It was 533, but one last invading tribe was standing in the way. Rome was under occupation. It was 538 when Justinian's soldiers helped the Pope, and he was free to exercise his power. It was ended by Napoleon in 1798. He'd sent his General Berthier a few months beforehand. Berthier was hampered by the winter. He didn't get there till February, but he took the Pope prisoner. He declared a republic. And the political power of the Catholic Church was broken. Am I just injecting my own opinion into all of this? Seriously. What is to stop me from doing that? What's the proof that what we've covered so far is accurate and the correct interpretation of these prophecies? Well, simple. If you've got all three levels correct, there's a harmony between them. And we can see that when we compare this idea of the Roman army surrounding the physical city of Jerusalem with the fact that after Constantine legalized the church compromised itself. First compromise, changing the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. Other compromises followed. I've said that in videos before. And really the theology of Protestantism, that's what it was supposed to be all about. But what we saw in the Dark Ages as a result of the spiritual compromises, they led into a political compromise as well. And the union of church and state is the harmonious comparison of our two levels so far. So that's the 1,260 days, but here in Daniel 12, we've got a different time period. We have 1,290 days and we have 1,335 days. Before the emperor could give the Pope political power, there was a peace treaty signed 30 years earlier. 508 AD, the Frank tribe that invaded and became the French, their leader Clovis signed a treaty that paved the way for the political union of church and state that happened. So that's where the beginning of the 1,290 days works out, and therefore it ends the same time, 1798. To get the 1,335 days, you just add it to the 1798, and what do you get? 1843. For those who want to research the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we came out of something called the Great Disappointment. By understanding these prophecies and a few others, people at the time thought the second coming of Christ was going to happen in their lifetime. And if I remember correctly, I think Mr. Beat covered that in his video. If not, there's lots of videos you can find on William Miller. What happened? They Did a little more figuring, a little more studying. They came up with 1844. Now, Jesus didn't happen, but as I said, multi-level prophecy. The tribulation was the Dark Ages. How do we know that? Matthew 24, 29 to 31, cross-referenced with a few other verses. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. The actual sun being darkened and moon not giving its light happened the same time. That's actually one sign. Stars falling from heaven. That is the second sign. But there's another sign that came before that, not really mentioned here in Matthew, but it's in Revelation 6:12. I looked, and when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood. I got on the computer, a couple of references here to the fulfillments of this prophecy from Revelation and from Matthew, and it's actually in Luke as well, which we'll look at it in a moment. But earthquake, 1755 was November 1st, Lisbon. And it wasn't just the physical quake that was the issue. I remember a few years ago a documentary I'd seen that ended by saying that the ideas of the French Enlightenment took hold in Portugal that day. Because you see, it was All Saints' Day, they were in church. And then here, their city is destroyed. So how many people thought, God is a big meanie up in the sky? How much skepticism did start that day? So again, not the physical shaking of the planet, the shaking of the ideas of our modern era that have shaken so many people's faith over the last 250, 300 years. Now, New England's dark day. This happened May 19th, 1780. Looking at the Wikipedia article here, and they claim, again, a lot of secular sources, you research these dates, you're not going to find people who see a spiritual significance. They claim it was smoke, forest fires, thick fog. Spiritual sources I've gone to, it was a supernatural darkness. You could not see a newspaper in front of your face. This was, again, just like the Lisbon earthquake, deep spiritual significance behind it. Because you see, this was in the middle of the American Revolution. The United States was started by deists trying to build a political promised land. They've been successful in many ways. But here's God saying there's something bigger because prophecy is being fulfilled. Yeah. Great Leonid meteor storm, again, hit North America. This was a different meteor storm. There's another passage in the book of Revelation I'll put up on screen here. The way they fell was from a central point in the sky. That's never happened. Meteors are always boom, 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 all over the place. But this was from a central point, just like a tree being shaken in the wind, shaking its fruit off. That date was November 13th, I think. Let me look. Yeah, November 13th, 1833. And a recent video documentary I just saw on the American PBS network, a Ken Burns film called The American Buffalo, referenced this event by the fact that native tribes were noticing it also. So there's a symbolic meaning there too. And here is a message to the people groups outside the Christian world that Christianity was expanding and that the Bible prophecies that were being fulfilled were going to affect everyone. Now, as far as Luke goes, it's Luke 21:25. And there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Wikipedia. Boxing, 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami. Some people think maybe that was it. or there might be some greater earthquake to come. We're not sure yet. Now in Matthew 24:22, Jesus said, "And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened." The shortening of the days, of course, was the Protestant Reformation, starting with people like Wycliffe and Huss, but getting ramped up in a big way through Martin Luther. The shortening the third time is going to be the final end. The second coming of Christ will happen. God will destroy this world and make a new one. And those who love him, they can be a part of it. Matthew chapter 24, verses 12 to 14. "And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." Why does the hate come on those who love God? It's because of the love of many growing cold, because of the iniquity that abounded all around them. The proper way to understand these prophecies, as wonderful as it is to see all the different wars and rumors of wars, famines, even these three great signs that happened from 1755 to 1833, there's something people are missing out on when they just give these prophecies a quick skim and don't really go deep into study. The outside signs, the wars, the rumors of wars, the famines, the earthquakes, they happen to everybody in the world. The entire Christian world had to face these things. But then we have the way people react to these events. And that's where contrast comes out between false and true believers within the realm of God's people. It was Jews persecuting Christians in the early days of the book of Acts. Romans attacked from the outside by these invading tribes, offering sacrifices to appease their pagan gods in the hope they could get victory on the battlefield. Christians wouldn't join with them. Christians get fed to the lions. False worship, true worship. How many different issues did the Catholic Church have? How many different false doctrines were Protestants standing up against? Like transubstantiation, the worship of Mary. How many people were burned at the stake through the Dark Ages? Always came down to worship. And today we're seeing this repeated. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 24 and look at it again. Verse 12, "Because lawlessness abounds, the love of many is growing cold." Where do we see this fulfilled? We see this in all these protest movements. Hollywood, the media, the intellectual elites, putting forth a lifestyle based on the ideas of the French Enlightenment that breaks as many of God's 10 Commandments as possible, all couched under a hidden veil of things that seem good, like fighting racism. Of course it was wrong for black people to have to ride in the back of a bus and be afraid of lynch mobs. Of course it was. Well, all right, let me start this final break-in here by saying, as much as I do not agree with abortion, with the legalization of prostitution, of gay marriage, of a lot of these things that are a central part of our society today, I do believe in kindness. And I know that the reason why Jesus was so nice to tax collectors and prostitutes and so hard on the religious leaders of his day was because they should know better. He told them about the mercy and love of God being the most important thing. But the thing is, mercy and love don't equal permission to sin. How can we understand all that's happening today? The right are getting more and more angry because of the sins of the left, but they don't understand the choices they're making are putting them in the same position as those who became Christ's enemies, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Jews, the people within the realm of his people. They were supposedly God's people at the time, and yet here's God talking to them about kindness and love and a practical application of the ideas of the Ten Commandments. And it just went over their heads because they were so focused on nationalism. And we're seeing this today in this idea of Christian nationalism. How are the right trying to take over? They can't close the abortion clinics. They can't stop the sale of pornography. The left are too powerful. They have all this guilt from the Holocaust and from the civil rights movement behind them. Which again, a lot of that guilt justified, of course. But the one thing the right can do is try and make everybody go to church. And how will they do that? By trying to pass Sunday laws, trying to make it as hard as possible to do anything else but, and then hoping that once those people are all in church, the ministers can start their sermons and all these evil people will be converted. It sounds good if you don't really understand prophecy and if you don't really understand the scriptures. The Protestant Reformation did not end with Martin Luther. It didn't end with John Calvin. It didn't end with Wesley and the Methodists. It continued with who? William Miller and the Seventh-day Adventists, even though there was a big mistake known as the Great Disappointment. He helped us to rediscover the fact that the seventh day is the true Sabbath, and a few other very important things. And the message of Revelation 14, a call back to true worship, is a call back to the true Sabbath. By trying to make people go to church on Sunday is a dead giveaway that God is not there in that movement. The true believers will be an international movement who are trying to save more than just one country, trying to save the whole world. Matthew 24 will be fulfilled in our day, a repeat of the whole thing. Just like in the first century, just like over the Dark Ages. And we've seen growing amounts of this same format come into our time. Earthquake, flood, forest fire, famine, all kinds of other disasters on everybody, as I've tried to describe in this video. And then boom, who's crying out to God? Who is sorry enough for their sins that they're going to ask for forgiveness? But will they do it properly? A Sunday law by the United States is the abomination of desolation in our time. It's also the mark of the beast. That is something I have to get into in another video, which I probably won't because all of our big name Adventist speakers, we have lots of preachers who do that. So I don't think I will. But now, what if these are the most outlandish statements you've ever heard? Well, is there Bible evidence? Have I put forth a harmony here? Matthew 24, verses 40 and 41. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Jesus said in how many parables the field is the world. If you go over my videos on why Seventh-day Adventists talk so much about doctrine, you'll see that the good and evil servant of Matthew 24 is 2 different kinds of Christians. So the 2 men here are the same. The 2 women here are the same. A woman is symbolic of the church. We have the pure woman of Revelation 12. We have the whore of Babylon in Revelation 17. 2 different kinds of Christians. What does it mean to grind at the mill? Jesus compared himself to a corn of wheat, a corn of grain that would fall and die and bring forth much fruit. And Paul told Timothy to preach the gospel by rightly dividing the word of God. So that's what it is. 2 different kinds of Christians, 2 different kinds of churches. One preaching the true gospel, which is connecting doctrine to the born-again experience, which is spoken of in the book of Revelation, true Christian faith and the 10 Commandments. And the other won't be. That is how to rightly understand Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 17, and Luke 21. May God bless you.